In 1994, the crimes of Fred and Rosemary West took over the front pages of British newspapers. Hardly anyone noticed that the year after the couple was arrested, a serial killer known as the Man in Black went on a killing spree in North Wales. On the morning of December 18, 1995, a dog walker called the police after finding a man's body on Penshurst Beach. The man was lying face down, with multiple stab wounds to his abdomen, chest, and back. When the police arrived at the scene, they noticed something. The blood on the ground came from more than one person. The victim's blood was scattered around the body, while other blood drops were on the pebbles leading towards the parking lot. The man was quickly identified as 40-year-old Anthony Davies, a father of 2 kids, who worked at the local crematorium. On the afternoon of the 17th, after taking an aunt who needed help back home, he did not go home but went to Penshurst Beach. In that area, Penshurst Beach was a well-known spot for gay men. Gay men would come there looking for casual sex. Usually there would be plenty of possible witnesses, but for the police, it also meant that very few people would be willing to speak up. Almost no gay man wanted to reveal his sexual orientation. But because of the murder case, after the police did their interviews, they still got an information. On the night of the murder, a white van had been seen hanging around suspiciously on Penshurst Beach. 2 days later, the police got an anonymous tip. The caller told them about his story. At Penshurst Beach, a man in a black leather jacket came up to him and took him to a house in Kinmel Bay, where he got badly beaten up. He said if he had not managed to escape by luck, he would certainly have died there. Then, an investigator was sent to check out this case. Following the caller's description, he found the house, which belonged to a man called Peter Howard Moore, the owner of 4 independent cinemas. During the questioning, the investigator noticed some suspicious things. Moore owned a white van that matched the model and color the witnesses had described. His hand was hurt and wrapped in bandages. So the police applied for a search warrant. The search results were shocking. They found a knife in the bag Moore was carrying, with blood still on the blade. In his house, they found a collection of Nazi items, Nazi flags, batons, handcuffs, a German military cap, black leather boots, and a North Wales police sergeant's uniform. There were splattered blood stains on the walls and ceiling, and in a pond on his land, they also found belongings from several different people. So, on December 21st, Moore was arrested. Faced with the physical evidence the police had found, Moore denied everything, saying the police had the wrong man. But 3 days later, in the early hours of the 24th, Christmas Eve, he pressed the call button in his cell at the police station and said he had something to say. His solicitor, Dylan Jones, was rushed back to the station, where he heard Moore, in a tone he later said was almost excited, confess over several hours to killing 4 people. On the night of December 17th, Moore drove to Penshurst Beach. In the parking lot, in Moore's confession, he said that Anthony had exposed himself in front of him, and then he took a knife from his car and stabbed Anthony. Anthony did not fall straight away. He fought back. Then, his knife cut his hand pretty badly. His blood dripped onto the pebbles, and Anthony was stabbed 16 times and eventually bled to death. Then, Moore mentioned another victim, Keith Randalls. 49-year-old Keith was a traffic safety manager responsible for night patrols at the A55 road expansion construction site on Anglesey. He lived in a caravan parked next to the construction site. According to police records, on the evening of November 29th, Keith went to a nearby fish and chip shop to buy dinner and then returned to his trailer. That was the last time he was seen alive, and his body was found by workers at 7:30 the next morning. In his confession, Moore recounted what happened on the night of the murder. After Keith returned to his caravan, Moore kept knocking on the door. When Keith opened it, Moore dragged him straight out of the caravan and stabbed him with a knife. Keith fought back and pleaded with him, asking why he was doing this. Moore did not stop. While he was stabbing Keith, he said, "For fun." In the end, Keith was stabbed to death outside the caravan. Moore also said that the whole time he got some kind of pleasure out of it. Then, Moore spoke about a victim named Edward Carthy. 28-year-old Edward was from Birkenhead, Merseyside, and had problems with drug addiction and alcoholism. One night in October, Moore met Edward in a gay bar in Liverpool. Edward was already drunk. He came over to Moore and asked him to drive him home to Birkenhead. In his confession, Moore recounted what happened next. He pretended to agree, but actually, he drove the wrong way, going across Liverpool Bay and into North Wales. Moore added, during the drive, when Edward realized the route was wrong, he tried to jump out of the car, but he stopped him. Then, Moore drove the car to Clokenod Forest near Rothin in Denbighshire, a huge dense forest that was almost empty of people at night. There, he stabbed Edward to death and buried the body. While confessing this part, Moore said he could take the police to the body, and he drew a detailed map showing where he had buried it. Then, based on that hand-drawn map, the police found Edward's remains at the spot he had marked. Since more than 2 months had passed, the remains had been chewed on by animals and were not complete. This was the third murder Moore had confessed to. Before this, Edward's body had never been found, and the police had no idea that he had been killed. In the end, Moore spoke about his first victim, 56-year-old Henry Roberts, a retired railway worker. Henry lived a fairly isolated life. He lived alone in a remote cottage in the village of Cargelliog on Anglesey, and did not have much contact with other people. Those who knew him all said he would not even hurt a fly, that he was just an eccentric but harmless old man who lived by himself. Henry's body was found by a neighbor lying on the driveway in front of his door. The autopsy showed he had been stabbed more than 20 times, with several wounds on his buttocks. How Moore got to Henry, there are 2 versions. Moore confessed that he wore dark clothes and a Nazi-style cap and just knocked on Henry's door. When Henry opened it, Henry kept saying he was not Jewish, and then Moore stabbed him. But an officer involved in the investigation gave another version. When Henry saw Moore's Nazi-style clothes, he invited Moore inside and showed him his large collection of Nazi things. Days later, Moore went back to Henry's house late at night, made some noise to get Henry outside, and then killed him. Within several hours, Moore had confessed to all 4 of his murders, describing in an almost emotionless tone how he chose his spots, how he carried out the attacks, and what it felt like when the knife went in. He said that killing was easy, just like a knife through butter. Moore's solicitor, Jones, later wrote this in his memoir. When Moore began to speak in the interrogation room, it was like watching a cold-blooded lizard move towards its prey, slowly, calculating every move, not using its energy unnecessarily, just describing the bare essentials of the deed. However, not long after, Moore took back his entire confession. He told the police that he had made it all up, and that the reason he did it was to protect the real killer, his boyfriend, 48-year-old Jason, who worked at the Imperial Hotel in Llandudno. They had met on the beach a year earlier. Hearing this, the police launched a big investigation. Every hotel, guest house, and bar along the North Wales coast that offered rooms was asked to hand over its records of guest and staff. The Imperial Hotel in Llandudno was checked more than once. But the police operation went on for weeks. Not one person matched Moore's description. No colleague had ever seen this man. No landlord had ever registered that name. The Jason Moore talked about simply did not exist. In November 1996, at Mould Crown Court in North Wales, Moore sat in the dock wearing a dark suit with his hair neatly combed. Queen's Counsel Alex Carlyle gave the opening statement for the prosecution. He looked at the jury and said a sentence that would later be quoted many times. "The man in black, black thoughts, and the blackest of deeds." The trial went on for several weeks. The court called a number of witnesses, including an anonymous male victim, who told the court Moore falsely said he was a police officer, handcuffed him, hit him with a baton, and got into his car to steal things. The prosecution also pointed out that before the 4 murders, Moore had a history of assaults going back 20 years. According to police estimates, between the mid-1970s and 1995, Moore had assaulted at least 50 men in North Wales and Merseyside. His method of operation was driving at night, wearing black leather clothing or police and Nazi uniforms, looking for victims at gay bars and on quiet roads, beating them with a baton, and then, before he drove off, masturbating over the unconscious victims. In his own defense, Moore admitted that he had sexually assaulted men, but he denied the killings and put all the blame on the so-called Jason, repeating this over and over. In the end, the jury found him guilty on all 4 counts of murder. He was given life in prison, with the judge saying he should never be released, and Home Secretary Michael Howard backed the judge's recommendation never to be released. When he passed sentence, the judge said to Moore, "You were responsible for 4 sadistic murders in the space of 3 months. None of the victims had done you the slightest bit of harm. At no stage have you shown the slightest remorse or regret for the killings, nor for the 20 years of terror and violence that preceded them." Later, people thought the name Jason came from the killer in the horror film Friday the 13th, the one who wears a hockey mask, never speaks, and can never be killed. Moore believed he could fool the justice system just as he had fooled most people in his daily life. Before he was arrested, Moore had lived in North Wales for decades. He ran 4 independent cinemas in Bagilt, Holyhead, and Denbigh, with very low ticket prices. When people in the community mentioned him, most would say he was a bit eccentric but a decent man. But not a single person, neighbors, business partners, cinema employees, ever really saw his true face. The 20 years of assaults and the 4 murders, the roots of all that violence can be traced back to Moore's childhood. In 1946, Moore was born in St. Helens, the only child in the family. His mother, Edith, gave birth to him in her 40s. Before that, she had always believed she could not have children, but Moore's birth completely changed that. So Edith doted on Moore a great deal. She saw him as a miracle son, and the neighbors all said she never believed Moore could do anything wrong. Moore's father, Ernie, ran a hardware store. He was big and walked with a military-style step and would drink whiskey on and off during the day. Later, Moore used one word to describe him: abusive drunk. Some neighbors offered an explanation for this. Ernie was a traditional man. He could see that Moore was different from other boys. He had a strong dislike for Moore's sexual orientation. He did not like it, would not tolerate it, and would tell Moore off. Edith's doting and Ernie's dislike, 2 completely opposite attitudes. This kind of extreme family environment was very likely one of the key things that turned Moore into a serial killer. From the mid-1970s, Moore began assaulting gay men. His later way of operating was gradually refined through these attacks. Driving at night, wearing black leather clothing or police and Nazi uniforms, looking for targets in gay bars and on quiet roads. In 1979, Ernie died, and Moore took over the hardware store, and then Moore started moving into the area that really interested him: films. By the early 1990s, he already owned and ran 4 independent cinemas in North Wales. Locally, Moore was seen as a middle-aged single man who loved old films and told dry, deadpan jokes. But his assaults never stopped. In 1994, Edith died, and in the autumn of the following year, Moore began to kill. Investigators believe that her death was the turning point in his criminal behavior. Without his mother's hold on him, a middle-aged single man with a long history of assaults no longer needed to keep up a good image. So he became a monster who saw killing for fun. Moore was held at Wakefield Prison in West Yorkshire, which is commonly known in Britain as the Monster Mansion. Its inmates included Harold Shipman, the doctor who killed over 200 patients and eventually killed himself in prison. One report said that Moore would joke about his crimes in prison. He told another inmate a story. Once he tied up a couple. The husband begged him not to hurt his wife, and Moore replied, "Sir, how dare you? I'm not here for her. It's you I want." In 2012, Moore and 2 other prisoners serving life sentences, Jeremy Bamber, who murdered his adoptive parents, and Douglas Vinter, who killed his wife, took a case to the European Court of Human Rights. They argued that a life sentence with no chance of release went against the ban on cruel or degrading treatment, and they wanted the chance to have regular parole hearings. When the news reached the victims' families, Edward's stepmother said, "How dare he? What about all the people he murdered and attacked? Where's their human rights and the victims' families?" Edward's sister said, "No court will give him parole. He will die in prison." In the end, after the court's ruling, Moore's life sentence stayed the same, never to be released. Henry Roberts, Keith Randalls, Edward Carthy, Anthony Davies, each one had their own name, each one had their own life. But the one who took all of that away said in the interrogation room that killing was easy, that he did it for no reason, just for fun.